Thank you for taking the time to watch my video. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up, as that will help grow my channel. If you'd like to subscribe, I'd appreciate that as well. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave those and I will respond. Again, thank you. This week's project is a little special. It's going to be a platter. If you remember, I did one about a year ago for a fundraiser. This one is also a fundraiser for a childhood friend of mine who's currently undergoing 4-stage breast cancer treatment. So we're going to do a cancer platter. I'm going to turn the platter. It's going to have a wide rim on it, and we're going to make that pink, and I'm going to do some laser engraving on it as well. So I made it pretty round. You can see I didn't follow the line exactly, but fortunately the lathe does a good job at making things that are roundish, making them round. Next thing I'm going to do is drill a hole here for my worm screw, and then we'll get it mounted on the lathe and we'll start turning it. The worm screw is a great way to mount a project, especially something like this, which is fairly lightweight to start with. It's also used in my chuck, and the reason the worm screw is different than most is reverse thread, so that as you're turning, the tool won't cause it to spin off. So here it is mounted in the lathe. You can see that I'm working the underside or backside of the bowl just to shape it. The first thing I want to do is remove some material to establish my rim. For those that are interested, and people often ask me how quickly can I turn a bowl, what you're seeing here is about 6 times speed. So it took me about 15-20 minutes to shape the underside of this bowl. Once I have the majority of the rim established, so it's as wide as I want, then I really start working on the bowl shape of the platter itself. Now this is going to be fairly shallow. It was only 2-inch stock to start with, and I'm creating something that's called an OG curve. So basically it's a sweeping sort of an S curve, and that's what I'm establishing here on the bottom of the bowl. The next thing I need to do, when I go to mount the bowl to reverse it around, there's 2 options. One, a tenon or a mortise. A tenon would be a male piece and the mortise is a female. In this case, I'm going to go with a mortise, so you can see I'm establishing the depth here. And it doesn't have to be very deep. Again, this bowl platter is not very heavy, so I can go with a fairly shallow mortise so that I maintain as much depth available to me in the platter itself. A mortise mounts in my chuck in reverse, so the chuck is expanding in the mortise, and I can go about 2.5 inches or so as a maximum diameter for my mortise. Now you can see that once the mortise has been established, I'm going to set a small landing area outside of that and then shape the bowl from there on out. Happy with the shape of the bowl platter itself, I start sanding the outside in order to finish that. I'm going to sand this completely, starting off here with just some paper, which I believe is 80 grit, and then I will switch to power sanding and completely sand the outside of the platter. You can see here now, obviously, the rim and the shape that I'm dealing with. Here I'm just doing some final refining of the edges of that mortise. You want these edges to be nice and square, actually a small V taper just to match the profile of my jaw chucks so that I get a good clamping surface. The other thing I'm looking for is I want the inside of that mortise to be flat. Not that that has anything to do with the holding of it, but later on I'm going to do some embellishment in that area, so I want that to be flat. And now I'm just doing some power sanding. Again, I'm not going to show all of this, but I go from 80 grit all the way up to 600. I can tell you that as long as I don't have any tear out, and I really don't seem to here, that's what I'm feeling for, 600 grit will leave you with a surface that feels as smooth as glass. If you're new to my channel, the next step, I've sanded this from 80 grit up to 600, and now I'm going to put on abrasive paste. This is a homemade abrasive paste. I have a video on that as well and how I made it. I'm going to apply that, and then after this is applied, I'm going to put an abrasive polish on, or not an abrasive, just a polish, which is wax based, which will end up being my finish. And this paste takes it up to about 1,000 grit wet sanded. So it does a good job. It's already pretty smooth, feels like glass, but this will just give it that extra little touch. You can see here that I've applied my finish, both the abrasive paste and the polishing wax. It does darken the wood up. How much it darkens the wood up depends on the species. Again, as I mentioned, this is butternut, and it darkened up quite nice actually to give it quite a nice color wood in the end. So what you saw me doing there was just after I applied it, I buffed it in, and then just continued changing the cloth to a new area until the cloth was clean. That told me that I got all the abrasive paste off of it. Now I'm going to go ahead and just put the wax paste on, and that's a beautiful, beautiful piece of wood. Smooth as glass, and it's nice looking wood. So again, this is a homemade polish, and I want to make sure I get a clean area of the cloth because I don't want to add any more abrasive again, but this is mostly wax finish. Again, if you're interested, look back in my video library and you'll see the video on where I made this as well. I've had viewers ask me about this as a final finish. With this abrasive polish, which is a beeswax mineral oil combination, quite often this is the only finish I apply. Now on the other side, I will spray lacquer on it. You'll see why in a moment. But on the underside of this, this is the only finish that this bowl will receive. So now we're going to turn the inside out. I've reversed it around. I've got it in my chuck. If you remember, I turned a tenon a mortise on there. And now I'm going to flatten this rim out before we hollow this out, because I want to leave this here because I'm going to paint the rim. Then when I go and hollow this out, I'll have clean wood. I'm going to make a little bit of a mark here where the bowl is going to be, and then so then I'll know where my rim is. I'm going to thin this rim down a little bit, and then we'll get ready to work the rim. Here I use my parting tool to get a starting point, a delineation between the rim and the inside, which is going to be the bowl piece. At this point, I'm actually thinning the rim down and I'm leaving that centerpiece, which will become the bowl, I'm leaving it a little bit proud. The reason being is when I paint, I'll have paint on the centerpiece that I want to remove and want it to be very clean. So I'm going to leave it a little bit proud. Here you can see I'm just flattening the rim up. I'm just using a backing board with some paper. Again, that's the best way to get a nice flat surface on the rim. Here you'll see I've done a little bit of power sanding. I don't want to do a lot. Two reasons. I don't want to take that surface that I've already flattened it and start to develop any profile to it. The other is I am going to paint it. And I do have to be careful that I don't go too fine of a grit because I don't want to seal that surface. I still want it to be porous enough to receive the paint that I'm going to apply. When I apply the paint, I'm using a RIT dye, which is an alcohol dye, so it's meant for clothing, but it works quite well in this application. I'm using an airbrush, and the first thing that I'm doing is I want to coat the entire rim black, and I'm putting it on fairly heavily. I did some, as you can see here, with the lathe spinning, and then I went back over some light spots later with the lathe stopped, just to make sure that I've got a really good coverage of the black. I use a heat gun just to speed up the process. I could have let it dry overnight, but I've got multiple coats here to make, so just in order to keep moving along, I use a heat gun. This heat gun, I do have to be careful. It is very, very hot, and I just need to make sure that I don't apply too much heat in any one spot. I don't want to scorch the wood, and I also don't want to apply any heat that might cause my rim to warp. The next step in the process, and it may seem counterintuitive, but I want to sand off the black. Now I'm not going to sand it off completely, as you'll see. Some of the black will stay down in the grooves and it will just leave some interest. I'm going to create a pink sunburst. So I want that black undertone underneath, and then I'm also going to go light pink on the inside up towards the bowl and get darker and darker as I go out to the rim, hence the sunburn. But it will primarily be just one solid color, different shades of pink. You can see here it's subtle. You can see the black that's still left in the grain, just in spots. Again, that's what I'm looking for, just enough black to create some interest so it's not looking flat and one-dimensional. I had mentioned earlier that I'm doing a RIT dye. I also used just some acrylic white because I actually want to make this a sunburst. So I want to be a very light pink in towards the center and then get darker as I go out towards the rim, like a sunburst pattern, but just with two colors, a pink and eventually go right to a black. So here I'm just starting with the very lightest color, which was a mix of acrylic white that I diluted down just in a water solution, and I mixed that with the RIT dye pure to give me a very light pink. Then later on I will do a darker pink which just has less of the white in it, and then eventually just the pure pink directly from RIT. As I'm spraying, I usually do a test right in the center to make sure I'm getting a nice pattern, and then I spray from the outside in. I also angle my air sprayer a little bit so that I don't get a hard line. By angling it, it tends to feather out the color a little bit more. All woodturners will know what I'm talking about. But as I start the inside of this bowl, one of the things I have to be very careful of, and it's happened to me many times, and I'm sure it's happened to everyone else, is when you first present that tool to start cutting the inside, sometimes it can skip and skid across the surface. Well, that will be a painted surface, so I definitely don't want that to happen. So I very carefully plunge my bowl gouge in until I can ride the bevel. Once I'm riding the bevel, then there's no danger of this happening. A little bit later on, you'll see that I actually refine that edge a little bit more with a parting tool. Again, just to protect and make sure that I maintain a crisp surface on the edge of the bowl up near the rim. Once I've got the majority of the material removed and I just want to refine the shape a little bit more, then I'll switch either to a scraper or my negative rake scraper. The shape that I'm going for here is a half of a circle, so smooth all the way down, no straight sections whatsoever. Think of a half of a sphere. Here I just do the same process that I did on the outside of the bowl. I apply my abrasive paste and my polishing wax. And you can see here how the color of the wood changes. This is butternut and it responds very well to the oil and the wax and darkens considerably. Here I just take a black Sharpie marker and actually color the outside of the rim to make it black. The black you see here on the surface was actually airbrushed on, but on the very lip on the edge, that's from the Sharpie marker. Next thing I do is I apply a lacquer finish to the rim. In hindsight, I probably made a mistake here. Before I started applying the color with the spray gun, I probably should have just used some water and raised the grain and sanded that down. Because the paint that I add with my air gun has a lot of liquid in it, it did tend to raise the grain quite a bit. But I just applied a spray lacquer, multiple coats. I think I ended up applying 10 or 12 coats and sanded lightly in between. So I'm ready to laser engrave this. So I've set my laser up. I'm using my regular logo. For those that are familiar, it's birch bowls with a picture of a bee. In this case, I'm replacing the bee with the cancer ribbon. So first thing I want to do is check and make sure that it's centered, and I do that by framing. You can see there the pattern that the engraver takes. It follows the circle that I've cut out. So now I'm going to go ahead and engrave the logo in the bottom of the bowl, platter, and it should be centered very well. So here's the finished product. I think it turned out very beautiful. I hope that Coreen enjoys it. So again, it was for Coreen, who's a family friend, and currently going through stage 4 breast cancer. So you're in our thoughts and prayers. Hopefully this cancer inspired bowl will bring you some joy. So you can see here the finished product, and it's got engraved my logo, but as I mentioned, it's got the cancer ribbon there. So again, hopefully you enjoyed this project, and Coreen, you're in our thoughts and prayers.